Everyone, and welcome to episode 83 of The Wool Circle. My name is Rebecca, and I'm coming to you on a special bonus episode of The Wool Circle, which is a subsidiary podcast of the wool and spinning community. This is a public episode of The Wool Circle, which is normally available to those at the $20 a month level and higher on the Wool and Spinning Patreon. But I wanted to take this opportunity to make a public video for everyone to enjoy, to help kick off our year of color, and to let you know what you can expect from me as we dig into this content on The Wool Circle in this space specifically. My personal goal for this year of color is to get down to the basic ingredients of color, to learn about it by playing with it, to go from being just a consumer of color to being able to produce color and manipulate it to do what I want it to do. For this video today, I'm going to give you a basic outline for what to expect for the beginning of our year of color as observed here on the Wool Circle. I'm going to give you an idea of what materials to have on hand so that you can work the exercises along with Rachel and me. And I'm going to share the first part of an interview with Katrina Stewart of Crafty Jacks as we discuss the color wheel. So let's start with an outline of where we're going on the Wool Circle. In January, we are really going to park on the color wheel. We're going to start that today by listening to my chat with Katrina and continue next time with the rest of that interview. We're also going to practice using a color wheel to analyze and describe the colors that we already have. And I'm hoping to take some time to dig into making our own color wheel. In February and March, we're going to dig into our first tool, which is hand cards. This is often the first tool that many of us come to for fiber preparation. If you don't know what they are not dog slickers. They're a lot bigger and they have nice sturdy tines, and they're really meant to be used for blending and processing wool and other fibers. These are amazing color blending tools. Even though at some level they might seem kind of basic because they're often the first tool that we come to, they're also incredibly powerful. So I want to really take the time to explore the many different things you can do with just hand cards. Our guide and inspiration for this year of color is going to be Deb Menz in her 2004 book, Color in Spinning. You do not have to own this book in order to participate. You may find that your library owns it, or if you're part of a local guild, they may have a copy that you can use. It is out of print, so it can be difficult to find. It can be expensive, but you can usually find copies of it for not too much. How I'm going to use this is I'm going to curate some of the exercises that she does give us to do in this book. I'm going to kind of make a collection of them because there's so much in here, it would really be impossible to cover all of it. But I'm going to share with you the exercises as appropriate within copyright law so that you can follow along even if you don't own this book. But I'll also tell you where we are so that you can follow along in the book if you have it. So let's talk about materials. I already talked about the book and I touched on hand cards. Any kind of hand cards will do. Rachel's going to talk more about what different kinds of hand cards there are, but for being on the Wool Circle, any hand cards that you have are totally fine. Doesn't matter the shape or the times per inch, whatever works. As far as actual fiber goes, what you're going to want to have on hand is some dyed fiber in solid or semi-solid colors. So the braids that you see like in the background here, those are not going to be quite as helpful for the exercises we're going to be doing. What you can use are sets of solid colors like you see here. And if you have like semi-solid, this is kind of a semi-solid purple shade, this can work as well. You're going to want some different dyed colors, and you're going to want some white and some black. As far as what colors to have on hand, that's really up to you. I want you to take some time and think about what colors you want to dig into as we begin this journey. We're going to take some twists and turns as we find out what we're learning, but just pick a place to start. It might be colors that you really like, that you want to see more of what they can do, or maybe a color you find more challenging that you want to challenge yourself with. It's totally your choice. As far as how much, for quarter one, don't think about getting a ton of fiber. Just spitballing, I would say get a few different colors, maybe 1 ounce each, and that should be plenty. I would say make sure that you get at least one set of complements. Doesn't have to be exact complements, but we are going to be playing across the color wheel a little bit. So let's just say, for example, if you bought a kit that was a whole bunch of blues and greens, you might want to throw a red or an orange in there, just to make sure that you could do a little bit of that crossing the color wheel as well. Where to get these fibers? I really lucked out and got a D-stash from a felter, so I have a very wide variety of hues to pick from. You may be able to score something like that on eBay. There's also companies that produce felting kits. They're more felting focused, but you can use those to get a really wide variety of very small quantities of fiber. There's also companies like Paradise Fibers in the US, where you can get kits that have several different colors of 1 ounce each, or where you can get 1 ounce quantities of lots of different colors, kind of a la carte. So there are lots of places you can get those if you don't want to use what you already have stashed. We really want this to be choose your own adventure. Take some time to reflect and think, what do you want to learn? Where do you want to start? And make sure that you have some white and some black. That will be important as well. One more tool that I'm going to talk about is the color wheel. I got this set of color wheels on Amazon. It's just super basic. They are used in interior design and mixing paint. Like I say, they're not very expensive. And I'm going to be talking more about how to use tools like this. If you don't want to get something like this, that's fine. You can make your own with watercolor paint. And I'm hoping that we get a chance to talk about that some in January. Beyond March, Rachel and I don't want to get too specific with our plans beyond then, because we want to stay nimble and be able to be free to pivot and dig deeper into one thing and another as we learn. We will hopefully, what I can tell you is that we will get into blending on hand combs. I'll just be using my basic 2-row combs, and I also just bought a blending board, so I know I'm going to be working with that some. If you do have those tools, that's fantastic. If not, I wanted to just give you plenty of lead time so that you can think about whether you're ready to invest in them or not. I would like to talk about tools like drum carders and hackles, but we may or may not get to those this year. I can also tell you that I will be doing at least a little bit of dyeing this year and sharing that content with you. You do not have to do this, but what happened is I got really inspired by a couple different chapters in Deb Menzies' book, and I got really inspired by the chapters on dyeing and on using hand-painted roving. So I'm going to take you along with me on that journey as I play along with colors. but that's not going to be a huge chunk of our content. For the vast majority of the time, I'm going to be focusing on prepping, blending, and spinning fibers. I hope that is helpful to let you know what to expect. I wanted you to have a clear idea of where we're going for the next few months so that you can feel prepared to jump in. By the end of the first quarter, we will have a clearer idea of how to prepare you for the next season. Rachel and I want to have the stance of, being ready for the give and take of this awesome community to be able to guide us as we explore color together. So to help us get started on this journey, I asked if Katrina Stewart of Crafty Jacks would be willing to share some of her wisdom about the tool that we call the color wheel. Just about every craft book on my shelf talks about the color wheel at some point, including color and spinning. Chances are you heard about it in elementary school. It seems on one level really simple. So why do we keep talking about it? How is it helpful? Does it have any hidden powers we should know about? What are its limitations? So in this first part of my chat with Katrina, we talk about color wheels, where they came from, and what their limits are. Enjoy. All right, this is my first time doing an interview, so okay, gotta choke down my nerves. I'm super excited to talk to you because we've been talking about this year of color for months now, and Rachel and I are getting really excited, making plans and looking at this book and stuff. And as part of getting ready for that, I ordered these color wheels just from Amazon, just these cheap things, and I started playing with them and realizing these colors on this wheel, this is not what I think of as blue. Like, this is not, I have a blue in my mind, and that's not this. And
yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I think the point of a color wheel for somebody like me who's still kind of figuring out color and how to manipulate it and stuff, I think, color can be so subjective, right? And I think, to me, the point of this is to introduce some objectivity into it. And but then, how objective is this tool really? The Wool Circle podcast is more focused on like the how-to stuff. So that's why I wanted to ask you specifically, to ask about color wheels. What is the point of this tool? How can it be helpful? How can we make it helpful? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So for me, color wheels are really a starting point. They're a place where you can see really easily what your complementary colors are, where your split complementaries lie, all of those sorts of things. It's a baseline. It's a tool at the base of your color knowledge. Understanding where the colors sit on the color wheel, sort of which ones classify as cool colors, which ones classify as warm colors, all of that sort of stuff is stuff that you can see really easily on a color wheel. In terms of making them your baseline for all color, there's lots of limitations with color wheels. So in terms of the way that we see color and the way that color can be printed are two different things. And so when we're talking about colors that are produced in a color wheel, you're limited by the colors that can be produced on a printer. And so you can have sort of a different knowledge of that color than what you can see produced on a wheel. Does that make sense?
So are we talking about like the limitations of the actual chemicals that we put into printer ink that can, versus the chemicals that you put on a wool? They're different chemicals, and it's literally different chemistry. And what your eyes see, how those photons hit your eyes, those aren't.
Yeah.
That sounds super sciencey.
So there is super sciencey parts of it. So what our eyes see and what can be represented by digital media are two very different things.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of the number of colors that we can see in nature and that we can discern in nature, you're looking at, like, for instance, this much color. Okay. And so this is just to give you like a visual. So our eyes can see this much color, and there's science on it. A camera can see this much color.
Mm.
And so what can be taken from what is seen, that's where you get like, there are some colors that are literally impossible to photograph, like hot pink, David's tea, that is really hard to photograph. Like all
Mm.
of these things that are, so the way that those colors are created is that, like a printer has, you know, you sort of have your cyan, which is blue, your magenta, and your yellow. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the three sort of base colors. They always have black. So to get a color like what they have on David's tea boxes, they also have a special color that they have to use to be able to print that color. You can't
Wow.
get that color from the base colors. So there's actually a color that is mixed to be able to print that color.
That's
And
so
so when you're
interesting.
looking at a basic color wheel, generally speaking, those are going to be used with the cyan, magenta, and yellow and black. And so you're limited. Like, for instance, um, these two yellows, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how well you can see that on the camera. You can see that this one is a little bit brighter and this one is a little bit warmer. They're both called, for me, they're both called primary colors.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I mix dyes with the bright yellow versus the warmer yellow, I'm going to get a very different look with each of these. And
Mm-hmm.
so a color wheel is a great place to start. But when you move into something like dyeing, creating your own color wheel and creating your own baseline for what you're working with is a way better way to move forward. Because like I have three different blues that are sort of primary blues. I have four different yellows and four different reds, and they all have slightly different tones to them. And by mixing those in different percentages, I'm going to get different shades of green. I'm going to get different shades of orange. I'm going to get different shades of purple and all of the colors in between.
Mm-hmm.
But not knowing what those primaries look like to begin with is going to create problems, because it's not like there's one yellow.
Yeah.
It's not like, you know, when we learn basic color, we're like, this is blue, this is red, this is yellow. That's not actually what happens in like dye space, in any of the sort of creative fields, right?
Mm.
So it's starting with your palette and knowing where your baseline is and working from there.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I want to hear more about your process in creating your color wheel. I just have a follow-up question on that. So I've got my big bag of solids here. It's really loud.
Mhm.
My big bag
Yeah.
that was gifted to me. So if I have like, this is my bag of blues. I guess my basic question is so this is a non-dyer question. This is a question as a consumer of color rather than a producer of color, which I think are different spaces
Yep.
that we occupy. If I've got like these two blues, and this guy is what this color wheel is calling blue. This is what they have decided is blue based on their limitations, whatever. When I hold, this is what I think of as blue, is like, this is like royal blue is usually what
Yeah.
that's called. When I hold this up to this color wheel, this comes up as like blue violet, or, almost into violet. So my
Yeah.
question is, when I'm trying to decide, like, say I want to mix a complement for this, do
Mhm.
I do I trust like my idea of what blue is, or do I go to this color wheel and say, okay, this comes out as blue violet, so I need to look for something that's exactly opposite to that? Does that make sense? Like, do I trust? can I trust the color wheel to be accurate in that sense?
I think that's a very subjective question because, you know, what I think color wheels are a really good guide. And so if you sort of look at that color and it's saying that it is more sort of a blue violet, chances are there is more of like a red undertone to that color. And that's where you're getting that violet sort of shade from it.
Mm-hmm.
And so using that as a guide and going, okay, this is the color that it's saying is its complement, and finding something that works within that is probably going to be better than saying, well, no, this is blue, so this has to be this.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
but it's finding that place where it works for you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the thing about tools like that, is it's always about finding the way that you can take that tool and apply it with the knowledge that you have and what you want to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I view it as a guide and going, okay, this is what the guide says.
Mm-hmm.
Do I like what the guide says? Or does my gut say, you know what? I like it more over here, so I'm going to do this. And this is going to be how I do it.
Sure.
And so, does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely in terms of not letting it tell you what to like. Yeah, don't
Mhm.
not letting the color tell you what your taste is. Makes sense. Um,
Does that answer your question though?
I
Or
think
does it?
so. I think so. I mean, I think as part of these studies, I'm going to be trying to go back to the base ingredients of color just to learn how to manipulate them, to learn, what
Mhm.
do complements do when you put them together? What is a true split complement? Say if I go to a show and I buy a braid, like is this a true complement or is this a split complement? Like just to be able to, I mean, it's another question in itself. Like, what is the point of describing color this way? Um, that's kind of a question in itself. Like, as a consumer, it's a little bit different because we can also just say, like, well, what do you like? What do you not like? But I think as
Mhm.
part of this study specifically, I want to be able to, I guess, just bring some objectivity into it so that I can describe what I like. You know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So what I've what I've learned as far as like complements and split complements and all of that sort of stuff, when we're looking at it on fiber, a lot of those terms and a lot of those color schemes are ones that were created for design work.
Mm.
And so they were created for creating palettes within like website design or creating palettes within homes. That's where those terminologies come from. Like it's not something that is necessarily used by dyers. Like dyers don't necessarily look at it and go, okay, this braid is going to be a split complement.
Hmm.
And these are specific colors I'm going to use. Oftentimes, when dyers are looking at putting color on fiber, they're like, what feels good? What's going to make an interesting colorway? What colors work together and how do they work together? And what sort of balances can I find within color?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not, they're not looking at it from the labels that the design world has put on what colorways are. They're looking at it from a perspective of where do these colors work together?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? And
Okay, so they
so
they serve a different purpose, is what you're saying.
they serve a different purpose.
Okay.
And so trying to pigeonhole a lot of colorways, like what we see on fiber, trying to figure out exactly where it falls into those sort of categories is going to be sort of a challenge. You've basically in fiber, in the fiber world, you have monochromatic, so that's braids that have just one color.
Mm-hmm.
You have analogous, which are braids that have colors that follow each other on the color wheel. So we're talking like 3, sometimes to 4 colorways that are directly next to each other on the color wheel. And then you have complementary ones. And you're going to get a variety of different complementary ones that will fall into triads, split complements, straight complements, all of that sort of stuff. But you'll find that there are very few that fall squarely into one of those categories.
Mm-hmm. So
Because
that's
there's
when the
always sort of,
terminology starts to sort of lose its usefulness once you get out of
Mhm.
analogous. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a complementary colorway because you're going to have colors from the opposite sides of the wheel, but trying to pigeonhole it into one of those things that is described as a split complement, or is described as, you know, um, a complement or a triad, or, all of those things, you're going to be harder pressed to find a specific category that one of those braids will fit into, um, in what the definition is, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Well, and that really matches with your and Rachel's book, the way you split up those chapters into, analogous and complementary and containing white. That
Mhm.
makes a lot of sense of that, because if you're basically saying that, analogous is a helpful term when you're describing a colorway, because it's very, very bounded in a very specific way that is kind of unusual, really.
Mhm.
But once you have all three primaries in there, it's almost like you are just dealing with a matter of taste and a matter of feeling, because there's so much overlap and so much variation that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, and see, like a lot of dyers will find bridges between colors. Like when we were talking about split complements, with one of the breed and color studies that we did years ago, there was a colorway that I did that had, it's called Lakeside. And so it had the red in it from the train. It was a photo that Rachel had taken. So there was the red from the train, but then there was shades of green from the grass and the mountains and the trees. But then I added blue. And part of the reason that I added blue is that if I didn't bridge between the red and the green in some way, shape, or form, when those two colors touched, we were going to get brown on there.
Mm-hmm.
And so by putting blue in between them, the blue represented the sky, but it shifts it from a true split complement because the blue is in there. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense? Like the blue doesn't sort of fall into that direct split complement, but it helps to serve a purpose when you're putting dye onto fiber, and then when you go to spin it, in terms of keeping a harmonious sort of color in there that doesn't create brown.
Mm-hmm. So that's like speaking to the specific practicalities of spinning, of like you of
Mhm.
color on fiber that is going to be attenuated, that is going to mix at the wheel, which is
Mhm.
that's really kind of unique to spinning, because you're not thinking about just mixing the colors you see. You're thinking about the mixing that's going to happen as you spin it. That's the way in which we as spinners, we have kind of a unique take on color, because we're still mixing and we're still controlling. And you see that in knitting as well. But yeah, that's interesting
Mhm.
to think about. So much of what Deb Menz talks about in color and spinning, so much of it's about color mixing. I would say
Mhm.
most of it is about the logic of mixing colors in your singles.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Well,
that's
and that's
really
the thing, right?
interesting.
Like spinning, because we're drafting and attenuating, and those colors are mixing. What we had on the braid to start with is not going to be what ends up in the final yarn, because
Mm-hmm.
you are going to get mixing and blending, and there's going to be marling within your singles if you're plying it, right? Like there's going to be marling in your singles, but then when you go to ply, you're going to get more color mixing. And so, and then in terms of what our eyes see, you can maybe distinguish two different colors close up, but from a distance, our eyes sort of, it's optical mixing, and so they blend that color together. And so you may be able to see, like if you've got a red and a green ply right next to each other, if you're looking at it closely, you might be able to see them, but from a distance, they're going to sort of blend and make brown.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the other part of the equation is that because of what we're doing with color and manipulating color, you're going to get a lot of optical mixing happening. Mm-hmm. And so those colors don't necessarily remain pure to what they were to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's so fascinating. Okay, I could circle that topic all day, because as a consumer of color, that would be something really important to look out for, is not just, is this complementary, but are there bridge colors, and are there places where complements are not just in the same braid but touching each other in the colorway. Like, that's a kind of really important piece of information to look out for if you're selecting a colorway. I'll have to think about that some more.
I hope you enjoyed this first part of our interview. In the second part, Katrina lets us behind the curtain into some of her color development process, and we start to dig into the truly limitless possibilities of the world of color. That will air next week on Monday, January 2nd, 2023. That will be for Wool Circle members and above, so if you are interested, please click on over to patreon.com/woolandspinning and subscribe to the tier called the Wool Circle. That tier also includes all of Rachel's teaching content, both teaching videos and PDFs, and it includes access to all past episodes of the Wool Circle. Rachel has opened an annual subscription option as well, which includes a 10% discount if that's helpful to you. Thank you for joining us on this special bonus episode of the Wool Circle. Thank you for watching and supporting what Rachel does at Wool and Spinning and allowing me to join her. Happy holidays, happy new year, and happy spinning. Bye-bye.